We've come out to Gjilan, Kosovo today in the southeastern part of the country to visit the Martyrs Monument overlooking the cemetery. And what I find so interesting about this place is that a number of Albanian historic figures who died before the 1998-1999 war and after in the insurgencies in Macedonia are buried here. And the first person we're taking a look at is Shaban Ukshini, who, along with his brother Sami Ukshini, were some of the original founders of the UCPMB. After the Kosovo War, the UCK officially demobilized, but many of the people who felt that Serbia was cracking down even harder on ethnic Albanians that lived just outside of their borders took up arms again. They said, why would we fight for our weapons just to turn them into NATO? And along with his brother, Sami Ukshini, Shaban fell on May 14th, 2001. And most Americans and most Westerners forget these insurgencies because it was just prior to the start of the global war on terror, and naturally 9/11 kind of overshadowed these conflicts. These conflicts happened in mostly the Preševo Valley. There were other areas they were trying to get involved with, but they mostly happened in Preševo, and specifically this area, the ground safety zone, which had been depopulated of all armed Yugoslav soldiers and only had armed police. And Arben Ramadani was an 18-year-old commander of the UCPMB. And you can see, as the situation on the ground deteriorates and NATO begins to take up an occupying force and bring in this sort of force protection, you had 18-year-olds commanding insurgents, and that's incredibly young to be a commander. And on May 20th, 2000, he and his squad crossed the ground safety zone and were killed by a sniper's bullet fired by a Serbian Yugoslav soldier. And what's also unusual is, even though he was an insurgent by every definition of the word, he was afforded a helicopter ride to NATO's Camp Bondsteel within Kosovo. This is Hasni Jamali, and I apologize for probably butchering a lot of these names. Not a lot of these people are known in English sources, but I have found information that says who they are, very little information. And as the UCPMB started to demobilize, many of them went to fight for the National Liberation Army inside of Macedonia. And this was sort of a continuation of the war. The UCK demobilized, and then they went to Gjilan and joined the UCPMB just over the border in the Preševo Valley, and when they demobilized, they went down to Macedonia to fight. And this fighting continued up until only a few years ago, and there still is a low-level insurgency, pretty much non-existent anymore. This is Samet Bugajevci, who in 1991, with Fadil Silihu in Croatia, were killed in the Siroka Kula massacre of 41 civilians killed by Serbian militants. These were Serbians who were trying to colonize Croatia at the beginning of the war, and Kosovo actually sent a number of people to help defend these Croatian Catholics, which is fascinating to me. Now I'm just panning across the cemetery, but the next grave I wanted to show you is that of Jivat Karimi, who died in a bus collision in 1993. He was a member of a left-wing group, a Marxist group called the People's Movement of Kosovo, or the LPK, and up until that point, Recep Malaj and Nuhi Berisha, who were leaders of this group, had been killed by assassins, and another organizer, Zia Shemzi, was tortured to death in Belgrade. He organized protests at the Hotel Pristina, and he's here on the right in the photo, in front of European dignitaries, and coordinated a mine strike. He was one of the first men to begin training with paramilitaries in 1991, and everybody thought it was very unusual when in 1993, in the middle of all of this organizing, he died in a bus collision. Buried here is Kastriot Erifi, who died in 2001 early in the Battle of Rahovica. He and a few other friends stood in the road and tried to engage a Serbian Yugoslav tank, but was shot in the arm. When a friend came up to pull him out of the road, both were killed by sniper fire. Some people escaped, but before they made it out, they saw two other men killed in the same engagement. And the next grave is that of Fatmir Ibishi, who is often considered the first martyr of the UCPMB. At the border checkpoint at Konchol, he was trying to engage a van with 4 Serb police officers in it. Now, the Yugoslav army had evacuated, but the police who were there were mostly former Serb paramilitaries, and they found out that the major in this van had been engaged with killing civilian supporters of the UCPMB. They managed to kill 3 of the 4 police, but Fatmir Ibishi was actually killed in that engagement. This is the grave of Rashad Yameri, a member of the People's Movement of Kosovo in Gjilan, which was led by that Kurimi I mentioned earlier. He was shot by Serb police as he tried distributing the LPK's manifesto near the post office. They tried to bring him to the hospital, but he was nearly dead anyway, and although police tried blocking it, he managed to survive. Now, this is Vebi Ibrahimi, who in 1981 was the chairman of the Albanian National Democratic Alliance. As a textile worker in Gjilan, he and 8 friends formed the Himalista Cultural Association. They lived in exile in Austria, and even in 1972, the Yugoslav government tried to hire Japanese assassins to kill him at a cultural expo at May Day. Some people hated him because he was anti-communist, and this was at a time where Albania, which was communist, was supporting most of these movements. In 1979, he was made the military commander of an Albanian militia here, and Zia Shemzu was the leader of the movement for the Albanian Socialist Republic. As a leader of this movement, he helped to distribute propaganda and weapons to Albanian insurgents within Kosovo, but also engaged in acts of sabotage in Belgrade. When they captured him in the Serbian capital of Belgrade, he was killed, tortured in prison. He was actually planning to strike from the very heart of Serbia, and here he is next to the communist Albanian flag. And the next 2 graves are those of Nuhi Berisha, who was killed alongside his friend Recep Male in 1984 by assassins hired by the Yugoslav secret police. This is because they were the leaders of the People's Movement of Kosovo, LPK, which was very Marxist in nature. They were getting arms and support from the Albanian government, at that point a very, very communist government. The Albanians under Hoxha were some of the most communist people on the planet, and I'll go over more about them later. But this is Kadri Zeka, who in 1972 was at the Faculty of Law in Pristina, and in 1973 formed the Revolutionary Group, same cell as Recep Male. Now, in 1974 to 1975, there was a crackdown in which he moved to the Leadership Committee in Switzerland. He was in exile there for a while, but continued coordination. He actually coordinated with Albanian embassies around the world, and in 1982, he was killed alongside the Garvala brothers in an ambush in Switzerland, or in Germany rather, that was basically paid for by assassins that were contracted out by the Yugoslav secret police. So these assassinations were part of a secret war that was happening even outside of the borders of Albania and Yugoslavia.
Prison. You have to leave within 30 minutes, and it's 11 o'clock now. There's no moment, there's an order. That's the end of the discussion. You have now 28 minutes.
On June 10th, 1999, there was an incredibly hasty withdrawal of all armed Serb soldiers and police from the area of Kosovo. And in the chaotic aftermath, NATO came to occupy it, and the KLA for the most part laid down their weapons. And at that point, a number of insurgents who had stayed out of the actual fighting decided to come up mostly from Macedonia and gather in Gjilan, where they formed the Gjilan Group. And from June till October 1999, the Gjilan killings commenced, and this was a collection of brutal reprisal killings of Serb civilians whom the Gjilan group felt helped support the police and the Serbian militants that were operating in Kosovo. And because the Kosovo government viewed most of the KLA fighters and the UCPMB as heroes, these men escaped prosecution in Kosovo and eventually were brought in Serbia. Now, the unusual character of their trial for war crimes in Serbia was that the testimony of a former KLA soldier was used to say that they tortured civilians, but they never revealed who the 11 accused were guilty of committing the individual tortures. They said the torture happened, but they didn't say who specifically committed it, and these men were given many, many, many years in prison. And in 2013, because of the discrepancies in the testimony, and they realized there were differences in the testimony of this anonymous KLA veteran, they finally acquitted all 11 members who were held in Serbian prisons, and they are now free in Gjilan. And you can see here Gjilan is in this area that is just north of Macedonia, and after the UCPMB uprising ended, they moved just south under the National Liberation Army.